When I was 7 years old, my family took a holiday to Gran Canaria, a beautiful island that felt like a paradise to me. I had never been anywhere like it before. My parents had talked about the trip for months, making it sound like the most amazing place on earth. As the day of our trip got closer, my excitement grew and grew. I imagined what it would be like to leave my small town and fly to an island where the sun never seemed to stop shining. To a kid my age, it felt magical, almost like stepping into a dream. When we finally arrived, Gran Canaria was everything I had hoped for. The air was warm and smelled like salt water, and the beaches stretched out with soft, golden sand. The sun was always shining, and there were palm trees everywhere, swaying gently in the breeze. I couldn't believe a place like this really existed. It was even more perfect than I had imagined. We stayed in a town called Puerto Rico, not the famous island in the Caribbean, but a resort town on the southwest coast of Gran Canaria. Puerto Rico was a place full of excitement and energy. Huge hotels perched on the sides of hills, looking out over the sparkling blue sea. The streets were lined with little shops selling all sorts of souvenirs, keychains, beach towels, and even inflatable pool toys shaped like dolphins and flamingos. There were also tons of restaurants offering ice cream in every flavor you could think of. I made it my mission to try as many as possible. Tourists, just like us, filled the streets, walking slowly in the sunshine, eating ice cream cones or carrying bags of souvenirs. It seemed like everyone was happy and relaxed, enjoying the laid-back vibe of the island. I remember walking around with my family, feeling like we were part of something special, something different from our normal lives back home. Every day felt like an adventure waiting to happen. But out of all the exciting things we did on that trip, there was one thing I had been looking forward to the most: the water park. I had never been to a water park before, and I couldn't wait. I had seen pictures of it in brochures my parents picked up, and I would stare at them for hours. The park looked huge. There were slides of all shapes and sizes, pools that went on forever, and places where water would spray up from the ground, making everyone laugh and jump around. It felt like a whole world designed just for fun. When the day finally came, I was buzzing with excitement. We packed our towels, swimsuits, and sunscreen and headed to the water park. As soon as we got there, I couldn't believe my eyes. The gates opened, and inside was a place even more amazing than the pictures had shown. I could hear the sounds of kids laughing and water splashing from every direction. Huge, colorful slides twisted and turned all around us, and people were zooming down them with shouts of joy and excitement. There were pools as far as I could see, and everyone looked like they were having the best day of their lives. I held onto my dad's hand tightly, but not because I was scared, because I was so excited that I felt like I might explode if I let go. I wanted to run in every direction at once, but I also didn't want to get lost in such a big, busy place. My eyes were drawn to the towering slides first. They were the biggest slides I had ever seen. They stretched so high into the sky that it seemed like they might touch the clouds. People whooshed down them at lightning speed, disappearing into the water with a splash that echoed through the park. The sight of those giant slides made me feel two things at once: excitement and fear. They looked thrilling, but I wasn't sure I was ready for something so huge. My dad noticed me staring and chuckled. "Maybe when you're a little older, you can try those." I smiled and nodded, feeling relieved that no one was going to make me go on the scary slides just yet. Instead, we headed toward the section of the park that was perfect for kids like me. There were smaller slides, pools with gentle waves, and fountains that sprayed water in every direction. It was like a playground, but with water everywhere. I spent the next hour having the time of my life. I'd climb the steps to the small slides, slide down, and splash into the pool below, laughing every time. My little brother, who was only 5 years old, stayed close to my mom, playing in the shallow water. Every now and then, my dad would take me on one of the medium-sized slides, the ones that gave me just the right mix of excitement and fear. We would climb up together, and my heart would pound as we stood at the top, looking down at the slide below. But as soon as we zipped down and hit the water, I'd be ready to do it all over again. After a while, my parents decided they wanted to try the biggest slides in the park, the ones that seemed to go straight up into the sky. I had been watching people go down them all day, their faces a mix of excitement and terror. I couldn't even imagine going on one of those slides myself. They looked so steep and fast. Even my dad, who was always brave and never seemed to get scared, looked a little nervous as he watched people shoot down the slide like rockets. My uncle and cousin were with us on the trip, and since the big slides were too scary for me and my brother, my uncle offered to stay behind and watch us while my parents went off to try them out. I didn't mind at all. I was perfectly happy playing in the kids' area with the smaller slides and pools that felt safe and fun. Before my parents left, I asked my dad if I could go back to the medium-sized slides we had been on earlier. He smiled and said, "Just make sure your uncle can still see you, okay?" I promised that I would stay where he could keep an eye on me. With that, my parents waved goodbye and headed off toward the towering slides that loomed over the park. I spent what felt like hours having fun, climbing up the steps, sliding down, and running back up again. I was completely lost in the joy of it all. The sounds of kids laughing, water splashing, and the sun shining down on the park made it feel like the perfect day. Time seemed to stretch out endlessly, like I could stay there forever, just sliding and splashing, without a care in the world. Eventually, though, I started to get tired. My legs ached from running up the stairs, and my arms were sore from pulling myself out of the water after each slide. I decided it was time to head back to the kids' area where the loungers were. I figured my uncle, cousin, and little brother would be waiting there for me, maybe even my parents by now. But when I got back, something didn't feel right. The loungers were empty. My uncle wasn't there. Neither was my cousin, and even my little brother was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the empty space where they should have been. My brain couldn't quite understand what was happening. I had been so sure they'd be waiting for me. But now they were gone, and I didn't know where they were. That's when the panic started to set in. I looked around, hoping to spot them nearby, maybe getting snacks or grabbing towels. But the more I looked, the more I realized they were nowhere in sight. I was all alone in a huge water park, surrounded by strangers. The sounds of laughter and water splashing around me suddenly felt far away, like I was in a bubble. I was just a little kid, lost in a place that now felt too big and too confusing. At first, I tried to stay calm. I had been told what to do if I ever got lost. Find a grown-up, ask for help, and stay put. But it's one thing to remember those rules when you're at home or school. It's a whole other thing when you're actually lost in a massive water park. I didn't even know where to start looking. The park felt like a maze, and I was just a tiny part of it, surrounded by people I didn't know. I decided to head toward the big slides. Maybe my parents had finished their rides and were waiting for me there. As I started walking, my heart pounded with every step. The crowds of people around me seemed so much taller and bigger now, and I felt so small. Everywhere I looked, there were happy faces, but none of them were the faces I was looking for. Then, something happened that made everything even scarier. A man appeared out of the crowd. He was a chubby guy with a round face and kind eyes. He smiled at me in a way that didn't seem threatening at first. He spoke English, though his accent was different from mine. I could tell he was from England, like many of the tourists around. "Are you lost?" he asked. "Do you need help finding your parents?" For a moment, I felt a wave of relief. Someone had noticed I was alone, and maybe he could help me. But then, my mom's voice popped into my head, as clear as if she were standing right beside me. Never talk to strangers. She had told me that over and over again. No matter how nice someone seemed, I couldn't trust them if I didn't know them. I still remember that summer day at the water park in Gran Canaria. It was supposed to be fun, one of those family vacations where you spend the whole time playing, laughing, and getting sunburned. But that day didn't go as planned. In fact, it turned into one of the scariest moments of my childhood. It started off like any normal day. The sun was blazing, and the smell of sunscreen was thick in the air. Kids were running around, splashing in the pools, and the sound of water rushing down slides filled the park. My parents had found a spot on the sunbeds, laid out their towels, and were getting comfortable for the day. I was excited, eager to explore the park on my own. I was young, but I wasn't a little kid anymore. At least, that's what I thought. After a while of playing in the shallow end of the pool, I asked my mom if I could go down the big slide. She looked at me with hesitation in her eyes. "Stay close," she said. "Don't wander too far. And remember, don't talk to strangers." I nodded, already distracted by the thought of racing down the slide. I didn't realize it then, but that would be the last time I'd see her for what felt like hours. The slide was everything I had hoped for: fast, thrilling, and fun. I went down a couple of times, enjoying the rush of water and the feeling of being free. But after a while, I wanted to find my parents again. The problem was, I couldn't quite remember which direction I'd come from. I walked around for a bit, thinking I'd easily spot them among the sea of sunbeds. But the park was huge, and after a few minutes, I realized I was completely lost. Panic began to rise in my chest. Everything suddenly seemed much bigger and more confusing than before. The pools and slides that had felt so exciting now seemed like a maze, and the crowds of people blurred into one another. I tried to stay calm, thinking I could figure it out on my own, but deep down, I felt small and scared. That's when he approached me. Out of nowhere, a man appeared, probably in his 40s, with a friendly smile on his face. He didn't look dangerous, just like a regular person enjoying the park. "Are you lost?" he asked, his tone gentle, like he wanted to help. I hesitated for a moment. My mom's words echoed in my head. "Don't talk to strangers." But at that moment, I was desperate for help. I didn't know what else to do, so I answered. "Yes," I said quietly. "I can't find my parents." He smiled again, this time a bit wider. "I can help you," he said. "I'm sure they're around here somewhere. Why don't we walk together and look for them?" Something about the way he said it made my stomach twist. But still, I didn't know how to say no. I thought maybe I was overreacting. After all, he was being nice, wasn't he? So I nodded, and we started walking. As we wandered through the park, I noticed how he kept glancing at me, like he was watching my every move. I tried to keep calm, telling myself that he was just being helpful. But the longer we walked, the more uncomfortable I felt. Something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew it. I started walking slower, hoping I might spot a familiar face or see the sunbeds where my parents had been sitting. Then, just as I was about to say something, the man stopped and turned to me with an even friendlier smile. "You must be hungry," he said. "Why don't we get some popcorn and a drink while we wait? We'll find your parents soon, I promise." Popcorn. It sounded so tempting. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, and the thought of sitting down with a snack felt comforting. For a brief second, I almost said yes. But then, My mom's warning played in my head again, louder this time. Never accept anything from strangers. I took a step back, shaking my head. No, thank you, I said, trying to sound polite but feeling the fear building inside me. Something about the way he kept offering things, the way he seemed too eager to keep me with him, sent a chill down my spine. He shrugged and smiled again, but this time, it didn't seem as friendly. Suit yourself, he said, and we kept walking. I felt trapped. I didn't know how to get away from him, and I didn't know where to go. The panic was rising again, faster now, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced with thoughts. What if he wasn't really trying to help? What if he was leading me somewhere I didn't want to go? That's when I saw a lifeguard, standing by the pool, wearing a bright red shirt and a whistle around his neck. He looked like a beacon of safety, like someone who could protect me. Without thinking, I ran over to him, my legs moving faster than my mind could process. I'm lost, I blurted out, my voice trembling. I can't find my family. The lifeguard bent down to my level, his expression calm and reassuring. It's okay, he said gently. We'll find them. Don't worry. Before the lifeguard could say anything else, the man appeared again. He walked right up to us, his smile still plastered on his face, like nothing was wrong. She's with me, he said casually. I'm a family friend. I'll take her back to her parents. The lifeguard's face changed. He straightened up and looked at me, his eyes serious. Do you know this man? He asked. I froze for a moment, but then I shook my head. No, I whispered, my voice barely audible. That was all the lifeguard needed to hear. He stood up tall, turned to the man, and said firmly, You need to leave. Now. For a split second, the man hesitated, as if deciding what to do next. But then he shrugged, as if it was no big deal, and walked away, disappearing into the crowd without a word. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I felt like I could finally breathe again. The lifeguard bent down to me, his voice softer now. You're safe, he said. Let's go find your parents. We walked together through the park, and with each step, I felt a little safer. Eventually, we found the sunbeds where my parents were sitting. They looked so peaceful, lounging like nothing had happened. But when my mom saw me with the lifeguard, her face changed. She jumped up and ran to me, pulling me into a tight hug. What happened? She asked, her voice full of worry. The lifeguard explained everything. My mom's face went pale as she listened, and she hugged me even tighter. My dad thanked the lifeguard over and over, shaking his hand with tears in his eyes. It wasn't until years later that I understood why my mom had been so shaken that day. That same year, a little girl named Madeline McCann had gone missing while on holiday in Portugal. It was all over the news, and it had terrified parents across the UK. My mom had been afraid that I could have been taken too, that I could have been the next child to disappear. Even now, when I think back to that day, a chill runs down my spine. What if I had trusted that man? What if I had taken the popcorn or followed him further into the park? I was lucky. Lucky that I remembered my mom's warnings. Lucky that I found the lifeguard. And lucky that nothing worse happened. That day taught me a lesson I'll never forget. Strangers aren't always what they seem, and trusting your instincts can make all the difference.